I almost turned my car around that Thanksgiving, and if I had, my entire family would still believe a story about me that was never true. I sat in my aging blue sedan with the engine idling, staring at my parents' house across the street while warm lights glowed through every window. The front porch was wrapped in orange and white pumpkins, a fall wreath hung neatly on the door, and I could already imagine the smell of roasted turkey, sweet potatoes, and fresh dinner rolls drifting through the house. It looked exactly like every Thanksgiving from my childhood, and somehow that made it even harder to step out of the car. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was another cheerful family group message filled with turkey emojis and smiling selfies from relatives who had already arrived. I looked at the screen for a second before locking it again. They had no idea I was sitting less than 50 yards away wondering whether I should drive home instead. It wasn't because I hated Thanksgiving. I actually loved everything about it. I loved football playing in the background, my mother's homemade pecan pie, my dad pretending he could carve the turkey better every single year, and my little cousins running through the house until someone reminded them not to spill cranberry sauce on the carpet. What I dreaded wasn't the holiday. It was what always happened whenever my older sister Lauren decided I had become the evening's entertainment. Lauren had a gift for making jokes that everyone laughed at without realizing someone else was paying the price. She never shouted. She never sounded cruel. She smiled while saying exactly the thing that would leave everyone else laughing and me wondering why I had bothered showing up. Every holiday seemed to come with a new theme. One year it was my apartment. Another year it was my old car. Last Christmas it was the fact that I worked too much. This year, I already knew what it would be before I even opened my car door. I was 33 years old, still single, and apparently that had become the most interesting thing about me. Never mind that I loved my career, had wonderful friends, paid my own bills, and built a life I was proud of. None of that made for an easy joke around the dinner table. Being the only unmarried adult in the family did. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, smoothed my sweater, and forced a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Just get through dinner, I whispered to myself. A few hours and you can go home. It sounded simple enough, but experience told me otherwise. The moment I stepped onto the sidewalk, I could hear laughter spilling out through the open front door. My dad spotted me first. "Emily," he called with the same warm smile he'd had my entire life. He wrapped me in a hug before taking the pumpkin pie from my hands. "Your mother was starting to worry." "Traffic," I lied gently, even though the only delay had been my own hesitation. Inside, everything looked perfect. The dining table was already set with polished silverware, folded napkins, and little name cards my mother insisted on making every year. My aunts chatted in the kitchen while my uncles debated football scores in the living room. My younger cousins were arguing over board games. It felt comforting, familiar, almost enough to convince me that maybe this year would be different. Then I heard Lauren's voice from across the room. "Well, look who finally made it," she said with an easy laugh as she walked over to hug me. "I was beginning to think you found a last-minute date and forgot all about us." A few relatives chuckled politely. I smiled because it was easier than explaining why the joke landed exactly where I feared it would. It was only one sentence, harmless if you didn't know the history, but I recognized the opening move. Lauren had stepped onto the stage, and everyone else was settling into their seats without even realizing there was about to be a performance. For the next half hour, I almost convinced myself that I had imagined the tension waiting for me. My mother handed me a warm mug of apple cider and asked about work. My father proudly showed everyone the perfectly browned turkey, and my youngest cousin insisted that I help him build a tower out of dinner rolls before anyone noticed. It felt wonderfully ordinary, the kind of family gathering people remember. With a smile years later, I caught myself relaxing for the first time all day. Maybe Lauren had simply made one harmless joke when I walked in. Maybe I had been expecting the worst because of old memories that no longer matched reality. I wanted that to be true more than I could admit. We gathered around the dining table just before sunset. The familiar tradition began with my father thanking everyone for making the trip and expressing gratitude for another year together. One by one, each person shared something they appreciated. My aunt was thankful for her new granddaughter. My uncle celebrated finally retiring after more than 40 years. My younger cousin was grateful that his high school football team had reached the playoffs. When it was my turn, I smiled and said that I was thankful everyone was healthy enough to be together because I knew how quickly life could change. My mother reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. For a brief moment, I felt seen instead of judged. Dinner began with passing bowls of mashed potatoes, green beans, stuffing, cranberry sauce, and turkey. Conversations split into smaller groups, filling the room with overlapping laughter. Across from me, Lauren seemed completely at ease, entertaining everyone with stories about her children and their latest adventures. She had always been naturally charming. She knew exactly how to make people laugh without appearing as though she was trying. Then my Aunt Denise looked at me with genuine curiosity and asked, "Emily, are you bringing anyone special to Christmas this year?" It was a simple question, asked without any hidden meaning. Before I could answer, Lauren leaned back in her chair with an amused grin. "Only if she finally agrees to let us set her up," she said. "At this point, I think the family has better odds of seeing snow in July." The table erupted in soft laughter. I forced a polite smile and answered, "No, it will probably just be me." I hoped that would end it. Instead, Lauren laughed again. "You have to admit, Emily has the highest standards in America. Every time someone introduces her to a nice guy, there is always some mysterious reason he is not good enough." My cousin laughed. "Maybe she is waiting for a movie star. Or a billionaire," another relative added playfully. I noticed that no one intended to hurt me. They believed they were participating in harmless family teasing because Lauren presented it that way. She controlled the mood so effortlessly that disagreeing with her would have felt awkward. I quietly buttered a dinner roll while the conversation circled around me as though I were no longer part of it. My father cleared his throat and asked my uncle about his fishing trip, trying to steer everyone toward another subject, but Lauren was not finished. "Honestly," she continued with a cheerful smile, "I keep telling Emily that life is easier when you stop searching for perfection. The rest of us figured that out years ago." More laughter followed, louder this time. My mother looked uncomfortable, but she busied herself refilling glasses instead of saying anything. I looked around the table and realized something painful. Everyone knew different pieces of my life, but no one knew the whole story. They knew I lived alone. They knew I worked long hours. They knew I had never married. Those facts had somehow become my entire identity during family gatherings. Nobody mentioned the volunteer work I loved on weekends, the promotions I had earned, the friendships that carried me through difficult seasons, or the quiet satisfaction I felt waking up each morning to a life I had built myself. Somehow all of that disappeared the moment someone asked whether I was dating. I glanced toward the kitchen window where the last light of the afternoon was fading into evening. I took a slow sip of water and reminded myself that I had promised to stay calm. It was still early. Dinner had barely begun. Deep down, however, I had the unmistakable feeling that Lauren was only warming up, and something told me the hardest part of the evening had not even arrived yet. Dinner continued, but I could feel the rhythm of the conversation shifting in a direction that had become painfully familiar over the years. Every topic somehow found its way back to milestones, families, weddings, and children. My uncle proudly showed pictures from his son's recent engagement. My aunt talked about helping plan a bridal shower. My younger cousin joked that he would probably be the next one to get married. I smiled whenever someone looked my way, but inside I felt myself retreating further into silence. I knew that if I defended myself too early, I would sound overly sensitive. If I said nothing, everyone would assume the jokes did not bother me. It was a strange kind of trap, one that Lauren seemed to understand better than anyone. She never attacked directly. She simply waited for the perfect opening, then nudged the conversation exactly where she wanted it to go. As dessert plates began replacing dinner dishes, she looked toward me with an expression that seemed almost innocent. "Emily always says she is too busy for dating," she said with a light laugh. Meanwhile, the rest of us somehow managed careers and relationships at the same time. A few people chuckled again. My cousin shrugged. "She probably just likes her independence." "Oh, she loves it," Lauren replied before I could answer. "Ask her to compromise on anything, and suddenly nobody measures up." I carefully folded my napkin onto my lap and took a slow sip of coffee. I reminded myself that every reaction I gave would become part of the evening's entertainment if I was not careful. My father noticed my silence and asked me about a recent business trip I had mentioned over the phone. I appreciated the effort. "It went well," I answered. "We finished a project that our team had been working on for months." "That sounds impressive," my aunt said kindly. Before the conversation could continue, Lauren smiled across the table. "See? Work is always the first thing she talks about. That is why we keep telling her she needs a life outside the office. More laughter filled the room. This time it lasted a little longer. I glanced toward my mother. She offered me an apologetic smile, but remained quiet, perhaps hoping the moment would pass on its own. She had always disliked conflict, especially during holidays. I understood that, but understanding it did not make the silence hurt any less. What nobody at that table realized was that I had spent years building a life that genuinely made me happy. I had close friends who felt like family. I traveled when I wanted. I mentored young professionals entering my field. I volunteered twice a month at a local community center because I believed giving back mattered. None of those things fit neatly into the simple story that Lauren enjoyed telling. The story where I was the lonely sister waiting for life to begin. It was easier for everyone to laugh at that version than to question whether they really knew me at all. Then my cousin's wife smiled warmly and asked, "Emily, have you ever thought about trying one of those dating applications everyone talks about?" I appreciated that she was honestly trying to help, but before I could answer, Lauren laughed so loudly that several conversations stopped. "Please," she said, wiping an imaginary tear from her eye. Emily would probably interview every guy like she was hiring a chief executive officer. Even relatives at the far end of the table laughed. Someone joked that applicants would need a 30-page resume. Another person added that references might be required. The comments bounced around the room until they no longer sounded like individual jokes. Together they became a single message about who everyone believed I was. I looked down at my untouched slice of pumpkin pie and realized I had completely lost my appetite. The room was still filled with smiling faces, clinking silverware, and the comforting smell of cinnamon and coffee, yet I had never felt more alone sitting among people who had known me my entire life. Across the table, I noticed my grandfather quietly watching everything without saying a word. He was the only person who was not laughing, and for just a second our eyes met. There was something thoughtful in his expression, almost as if he recognized that what everyone else considered harmless teasing had crossed a line long before anyone noticed. I lowered my gaze again, took one slow breath, and understood that the evening was moving toward a moment none of us would be able to take back once it arrived. After dinner, the plates were cleared away, and everyone naturally drifted into the living room with slices of pumpkin pie and cups of fresh coffee. My father turned on the television just loud enough for the football game to become background noise, while conversations broke into comfortable little circles around the house. I carried my dessert to a quiet corner of the couch, hoping that if I stayed occupied, I could simply blend into the evening. For a few minutes, it actually worked. My aunt asked me about a book she had recently finished, my younger cousin wanted advice about applying for internships after college, and my mother smiled every time she caught me laughing. I started thinking that perhaps the uncomfortable part of the night had already passed. Then Lauren walked into the room balancing a plate of pie in one hand and a glass of sparkling cider in the other. She settled into the armchair directly across from me, as though she had been waiting for the perfect moment. "Emily always gives the best career advice," she announced with an easy smile. "She has plenty of free evenings to research everything." Several people laughed again. It was not cruel laughter. It was the kind people shared when they assumed everyone involved was enjoying the joke. I smiled politely without saying anything. "Seriously," Lauren continued, "I do not know how she keeps such a spotless apartment. Mine has 2 kids running through it every day." She shrugged dramatically. "I guess having no husband and no children does leave you with extra time." Someone chuckled. Another relative nodded absent-mindedly, while taking another bite of pie. I noticed my father glance toward me before quickly looking away. He knew I was uncomfortable, but he also seemed unsure how to interrupt without making the moment feel even more awkward. My mother quietly began collecting empty coffee cups that did not actually need collecting. She had developed that habit years ago whenever family conversations became tense. I stared down at my untouched slice of pie. It suddenly seemed impossible to swallow even a single bite. The strange thing was that none of Lauren's comments were especially harsh on their own. It was the steady rhythm of them, one after another, each one reducing my entire life to a single missing detail. No one asked whether I was happy. No one asked what I had accomplished during the past year. The conversation kept circling back to what I did not have instead of what I did. My cousin Ethan, who had recently graduated from college, sat beside me and quietly asked, "So how is the new position at your company going?" Relief washed over me. Finally, a different subject. I smiled and began explaining how my team had expanded and how I was managing a major project that I genuinely loved. Before I could finish my second sentence, Lauren laughed lightly. See? That is Emily. She can make spreadsheets sound romantic. More laughter filled the room. Maybe one day she will marry her job, Lauren added with a playful wink. Ethan gave an uncomfortable smile, but did not laugh this time. Instead, he looked at me as though he had finally noticed something everyone else had been missing. Across the room, my grandmother quietly lowered her coffee cup. She did not say a word, yet I caught the thoughtful expression on her face. It was subtle, but for the first time all evening, someone seemed to be questioning whether the jokes were actually funny. Lauren, however, appeared encouraged by every laugh she received. She leaned back confidently, completely certain that she still had the room on her side. I realized something important as I watched everyone react. Lauren was not trying to have a conversation with me. She was performing for an audience. Every comment earned another smile, another laugh, another reminder that she knew exactly how to control the atmosphere. If I defended myself too early, I would only look overly sensitive. If I stayed silent, the performance would continue. I folded my hands together and took a slow breath, reminding myself that not every battle had to begin the moment someone threw the first stone. Still, somewhere deep inside, I could feel a quiet line approaching, and I knew that if it was crossed, silence would no longer be the right answer. After dessert, everyone drifted into the living room carrying slices of pie and fresh cups of coffee, while a football game played quietly on the television. The children disappeared upstairs. The older relatives settled into familiar chairs, and conversations became smaller and more personal. Normally, that part of the evening was my favorite, because people relaxed once dinner was over. I thought perhaps the uncomfortable moments had finally passed. I even found myself laughing with my aunt about an old family vacation where my father had gotten hopelessly lost trying to find a campground. For a few minutes, I almost forgot how tense I had been. Then Lauren walked back into the room, carrying a photo album my mother kept on the bookshelf. "You have to see these," she said with a bright smile as she sat on the coffee table. I found pictures from high school. Everyone leaned in with curiosity. The first few photographs were harmless. There were school plays, birthday parties, camping trips, and awkward hairstyles that made everyone laugh, including me. Then Lauren turned another page and pointed to a picture of me standing beside a boy during senior prom. "Remember Daniel?" she asked. Emily broke up with him because she said they wanted different things. She laughed softly before adding, "Looking back, maybe she should have lowered the bar just a little." Several relatives laughed again, assuming it was simply another playful memory. I smiled politely, but inside I felt the familiar sting. Daniel and I had ended things kindly many years earlier because we truly wanted different futures. There had never been resentment between us. Yet Lauren managed to reshape an ordinary memory into another joke at my expense. She kept flipping through the album. "Here is another one," she announced. This was the guy from college. I do not even remember his name because he disappeared so fast. She looked at me with a grin that invited the room to join her. Honestly, Emily has had more chances than anyone. If she is still single, that has to be a choice at this point. A ripple of laughter spread through the room once more. My mother quietly reached for the album as though hoping to close it, but Lauren continued holding it open. "Mom, do not worry," she said cheerfully. "We are only teasing. Emily knows we love her." Those words landed harder than all the jokes before them. "We are only teasing. Emily knows we love her." Somehow those sentences always made it impossible to explain the hurt because anyone who objected immediately seemed unable to take a joke. I looked around the room. My father stared into his coffee without speaking. My aunt avoided eye contact. My cousins shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Even the football announcer on television seemed louder than the silence growing between each laugh. Then Lauren delivered the sentence that changed everything. She smiled toward the group and said, "The truth is, every Thanksgiving we are all secretly wondering the same thing. Is Emily ever going to have a family of her own? Or should we just accept that she is going to spend every holiday as the fun aunt forever?" The room instantly became quiet. Nobody laughed right away. Even those who usually smiled at Lauren's jokes hesitated. I felt something inside me become unexpectedly calm. Not angry, not embarrassed, simply clear. For years I had convinced myself that staying silent kept the peace. I had believed that if I ignored the comments, eventually they would stop. Instead, my silence had slowly become permission. Every year the jokes had grown bolder because no one had ever heard me say otherwise. I looked at the faces surrounding me, people who genuinely believed they knew my life because they had listened to someone else's version of it for so many years. I realized that if I stayed quiet one more time, nothing would ever change. Next Thanksgiving would sound exactly the same. The year after that would too. My coffee had gone cold in my hands, but I set the mug carefully onto the table anyway. I straightened my shoulders, took one slow breath, and met Lauren's eyes without smiling. For the first time that entire evening, I was not searching for the easiest way to escape the conversation. I was deciding that it was finally time to become part of it. Lauren held my gaze for a moment with the confident smile she always wore when she expected another easy laugh. Instead of speaking immediately, I let the silence settle over the room. It was amazing how different silence sounded when no one rushed to fill it. I looked around at the people I loved, at the family photographs on the walls, at the fireplace where stockings would hang in another month, and then I looked back at my sister. When I finally spoke, my voice surprised even me. It was steady, calm, and almost gentle. "Lauren," I said, "can I ask you something?" She shrugged with a smile. "Of course. When was the last time you asked me whether I was happy?" Her smile faded just enough for me to notice. She blinked once, clearly expecting a different response. Before she could answer, I continued. "Not whether I was dating. Not whether I had met someone. Not whether I planned to get married. Just whether I was happy." Nobody said a word. I looked around the room again. "Actually, I would like to ask everyone that question. Has anyone here ever asked me that?" My father slowly lowered his coffee mug onto the table. My mother stared at her hands. My aunt looked thoughtful, searching her memory. No one answered because they already knew the answer. I smiled softly, not with anger but with sadness. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday, somehow we end up talking about one thing. My relationship status. It has become the first thing people mention about me, as though it is the headline of my life. I took a slow breath before continuing. I do not blame anyone for asking once in a while. Families are curious. I understand that. But after years of hearing the same jokes, the same comments, and the same assumptions, something strange happens. People stop seeing the person and start seeing only the missing piece. The room remained perfectly still. Even the football game in the background seemed to disappear beneath the silence. Lauren folded her arms, trying to recover her confidence. "Emily, nobody is trying to hurt you," she said with a nervous laugh. "We are just having fun." I nodded. "I believe that you think that." My words were quiet, but every person in the room was listening now. That is exactly why I have never said anything before. Because every time someone says they are only joking, it becomes impossible for the other person to explain why it hurts. Lauren opened her mouth to interrupt, but I gently continued before she could speak. "You know what is interesting? Nobody ever jokes about Uncle Robert still fishing every weekend instead of traveling. Nobody laughs because Aunt Denise enjoys gardening more than social events. Nobody questions why Grandpa still reads history books every morning. We accept that people build different lives because we respect that happiness looks different for everyone." I paused for a moment. But somehow, because I am not married, my entire life becomes a conversation. My grandfather quietly nodded without saying a word. I noticed it, and so did everyone else. I have spent years smiling through these moments because I wanted everyone else to enjoy the holidays. I convinced myself that staying quiet was the mature thing to do. But staying quiet has not made the jokes stop. It has only convinced everyone that I agree with them. I looked directly at Lauren again, not with resentment, but with honesty. "You asked whether I was ever going to have a family of my own. I already have one. I am sitting in this room with them. The part that hurts is realizing that sometimes my own family sees what I do not have before they see everything I do." No one laughed this time. No one even attempted to break the silence. For the first time all evening, every pair of eyes in the room was not looking at me as the single sister. They were looking at me as someone they had never truly listened to before. Taylor did not speak until the patrol vehicle disappeared beyond the final curve. The silence settled over the checkpoint with an unexpected calm, as if the air itself had decided to stop arguing. Marcus remained beside her, arms crossed, studying the distant highway without saying a word. Finally, he nodded once. "That was not luck. You knew exactly what to say." Taylor let out a slow breath she had been holding for what felt like an hour. Experience teaches you when people are listening and when they are only waiting for their turn to talk. Marcus almost smiled. My father used to say the same thing. The unexpected comment caught her attention. She looked at him for the first time since sunrise and noticed something she had missed. Before, the hard expression he carried around the base had softened. It was only for a moment, but it was enough to remind her that every uniform carried a story hidden beneath its patches and rank. Before either of them could continue, the radio crackled again. Dispatch requested confirmation that traffic was flowing normally after the inspection. Taylor answered calmly that operations had resumed without incident and that no further assistance was required. The response came back almost immediately. Copy that. Good work. Marcus raised one eyebrow. They never say good work unless someone important is paying attention. Taylor shrugged. Then let them pay attention to the team instead of one person. As the afternoon moved forward, civilian contractors and supply vehicles continued arriving. The atmosphere had changed. Drivers approached the checkpoint more patiently than they had earlier. Word spread quickly across military installations, and respectful treatment often traveled just as fast as complaints. One older truck driver rolled down his window and smiled. I heard things got tense this morning. Glad someone kept their head. Taylor thanked him without encouraging further conversation. She understood that stories often grew larger every time they were repeated. Facts mattered more than rumors. During a short equipment inspection, Marcus noticed that one of the portable floodlights had a damaged cable. Most people would have ignored it until nightfall, but Taylor immediately marked it for replacement and contacted maintenance. Marcus watched her finish the paperwork before speaking again. You notice small things before they become big problems. That habit saves people. Taylor answered without looking up. Little mistakes usually introduce the big ones. My first supervisor drilled that into every shift I ever worked. Marcus laughed quietly. I think I would have liked meeting that supervisor. Hours later, the sun began dropping lower, covering the security gate with long golden shadows. Evening traffic slowed, giving everyone a chance to breathe. Sergeant Collins walked across the pavement carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Taylor without ceremony. She accepted it with quiet appreciation. Collins stood beside them for several seconds before speaking. Headquarters reviewed the preliminary reports. Nobody found anything to criticize. In fact, they asked for copies of the communication log because they thought the situation was handled professionally. Taylor simply nodded. She had learned long ago that praise could disappear as quickly as criticism. Consistency lasted longer than either one. Collins looked at Marcus. She earned that respect today. Marcus answered immediately. She earned it long before today. We just finally watched it happen. Taylor stared toward the entrance as another family vehicle approached the gate. Children laughed inside the back seat while their parents searched for identification cards. She smiled politely as she completed another routine inspection. Life on the installation continued exactly as it always had, yet something invisible had shifted. Not because one difficult conversation had ended peacefully, but because trust had quietly started replacing doubt. Without announcements, celebrations, or dramatic speeches, the people around her had begun seeing what steady character looked like when pressure tested every decision. Taylor knew tomorrow would bring another unpredictable shift, another long list of responsibilities, and another opportunity for unexpected challenges. She welcomed that reality with the same calm confidence that had carried her through the day, understanding that true leadership was rarely measured during easy moments. It revealed itself when ordinary people quietly chose patience, integrity, and respect even when nobody expected them to. Taylor arrived before sunrise the next morning, just as the first light began touching the edges of the distant hills beyond the installation. The air carried the cool freshness that disappeared quickly once the day began, and the quiet reminded her why she had always preferred the earliest shift. It gave people a chance to think before the world became noisy. She completed her equipment inspection with the same steady routine she followed every day, checking every radio battery, flashlight, identification scanner, and emergency binder without rushing a single step. Marcus arrived a few minutes later carrying a clipboard instead of his usual coffee. He looked at her with a knowing smile. Headquarters sent a message overnight. Taylor glanced up. Good news or more paperwork? Marcus laughed softly. Around here those usually arrive together. He handed her the printed memo. The command staff had selected the previous day's checkpoint report as an example for future communication training. There were no medals mentioned, no special recognition, only a note explaining that calm professionalism during difficult interactions strengthened trust across the installation. Taylor folded the paper carefully before placing it inside her folder. That matters more than applause. Marcus nodded in agreement. It also lasts longer. The morning traffic gradually increased as military families, civilian employees, and delivery drivers entered through the gate. Several familiar faces greeted Taylor by name, something that had not happened a week earlier. Respect had quietly replaced uncertainty. One young airman stopped after presenting his identification. "I heard about yesterday. My supervisor said you reminded everyone that respect goes both ways." Taylor answered with a small smile. "Every person deserves to be treated fairly. That never changes." The airman thanked her before continuing toward the parking area. Marcus watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. "Reputation is interesting," he said. "You spend years building it one decision at a time. Then suddenly people think it appeared overnight." Taylor continued checking identification cards while answering. Most people only notice the finished bridge. They never watch every beam being installed underneath it. Around mid-morning, a new security officer reported for temporary assignment at the checkpoint. His name was Daniel, and although he had completed training, it was obvious he felt nervous standing beside experienced personnel. Taylor welcomed him without making a speech. Instead, she walked him through the inspection process exactly as someone had once done for her years earlier. She explained why eye contact mattered, why clear instructions prevented confusion, and why every conversation should begin with respect instead of suspicion. Daniel listened carefully, occasionally asking thoughtful questions. During one vehicle inspection, he hesitated before approving a visitor pass. Taylor stepped beside him without taking over the situation. "What are you noticing?" she asked quietly. Daniel pointed toward a small difference between the visitor registration and the identification card. Taylor reviewed the documents before smiling. "Good observation. You caught something important. Let us verify it instead of guessing." After a brief phone call, the issue was explained as a simple clerical mistake that was corrected within minutes. Daniel looked relieved. "I almost waved them through because I did not want to slow the line." Taylor answered calmly. "Accuracy and kindness can exist together. You never have to sacrifice one to protect the other." Marcus overheard the conversation and gave Daniel an approving nod. By lunchtime, the temporary officer looked far more confident than he had only hours earlier. As the afternoon settled across the installation, Sergeant Collins stopped by once again. This time he carried no reports and no instructions. He simply observed the checkpoint for several minutes before speaking. "The atmosphere feels different here now. People seem more relaxed." Taylor looked toward the steady flow of vehicles entering the base. "Procedures have not changed, only the way we carry them out." Collins smiled. "Sometimes that is exactly what leadership looks like. Not changing the rules, but changing the experience people have while following them." Taylor returned to her position as another vehicle approached the inspection point. She greeted the driver with the same calm professionalism she had shown every person before, understanding that the strongest examples were rarely the loudest. They were built quietly through ordinary moments repeated with extraordinary consistency until respect became part of the culture itself. Taylor barely noticed when another week began because the rhythm of the checkpoint had settled into something steady and dependable. Every shift started with the same careful inspection, the same exchange of greetings, and the same commitment to treating every visitor with professionalism. The difference now was not in the procedures. It was in the confidence shared by the people working beside her. Daniel no longer hesitated before making routine decisions. Marcus spent less time double-checking every detail because he trusted the judgment of the entire team. Even Sergeant Collins seemed more relaxed whenever he stopped by the gate. Early that afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived in a plain government sedan. The driver presented official credentials identifying him as a senior inspector assigned to review daily operations across several installations. There had been no announcement and no advance notice. Taylor welcomed him with the same calm tone she used for everyone else. After confirming the required documentation, she directed him toward the visitor parking area. The inspector paused before walking away. Most checkpoints become noticeably different when they know an inspection is happening. Yours did not. Taylor answered honestly. The routine should not change because someone important is watching. It should already be correct before they arrive. The inspector smiled slightly before continuing toward headquarters. Marcus waited until the vehicle disappeared from view before speaking. You know who that was, right? Taylor shook her head. Someone doing his job. That is enough information for me. Marcus laughed quietly. Sometimes I think that is exactly why people respect you. Throughout the afternoon, the team continued handling deliveries, employee arrivals, and scheduled visitors with the same consistent pace. Daniel stopped beside Taylor during a slower moment. Can I ask you something? She nodded. When did you stop feeling nervous every day? Taylor considered the question before answering. I never completely stopped. I simply learned that preparation speaks louder than fear. If you know your responsibilities and treat people with respect, confidence usually follows. Daniel reflected on the answer for several seconds. I thought experienced people never question themselves. Taylor smiled. The best professionals question themselves often enough to keep learning, but not so much that they stop doing their jobs. Near the end of the shift, the inspector returned from headquarters carrying a small notebook. Instead of leaving immediately, he asked whether he could spend a few minutes observing the checkpoint during the evening traffic. Taylor welcomed him without changing the team's routine. Families arrived after school activities. Contractors departed for the day. Delivery trucks checked out through the gate after completing their routes. Every interaction remained polite, clear, and efficient. No one rushed. No one cut corners. After nearly 40 minutes, the inspector closed his notebook. I have visited 6 installations this month. Every location follows the same written procedures. What separates one team from another is not the handbook. It is the culture. He looked directly at Taylor before continuing. Your team demonstrates something that cannot be ordered through policy alone. People here seem to believe that respect is part of security rather than separate from it. Taylor responded quietly. Respect encourages cooperation, and cooperation usually leads to better awareness. Everyone benefits. The inspector nodded with obvious approval. Before leaving, he shook hands with Marcus, Daniel, Sergeant Collins, and finally Taylor. Thank you for reminding me that professionalism does not need to be loud to make a lasting impression. After the sedan disappeared beyond the front gate, Daniel looked at Taylor with genuine admiration. That was probably the most important visitor we will see all year. Taylor watched another vehicle approach the checkpoint and reached for the identification scanner. Maybe, she answered, but this next driver deserves the same attention. Marcus smiled as he returned to his position. That is the lesson people keep trying to explain about you. There are no important people and ordinary people standing in your line. There are only people, and every one of them deserves your best. Taylor greeted the approaching family with the same warm professionalism that had become second nature, quietly proving once again that the strongest leadership was never performed for recognition. It was practiced one respectful conversation at a time until excellence became an everyday habit.